Well, thank you very much for inviting me and having me here today. I want to talk about the soil food web and growing grapes. Fortunately, I've got 20 minutes for a 3 hour speech. Fortunately, I'm from New York and I speak very quickly. And in Alaska, where I live, if you don't speak quickly in the wintertime, your word's free. So I'm pretty good at this. I'm known as the Lord of the Roots. I used to have a trilogy of books on the soil food web. And now I have four of them, so it's now a tetralogy or a quadrology, the last book teeming with bacteria. I learned about the soil food web from Dr. Elaine Ingham back in 1988, and this is pretty much what they had about the soil food web. It's pretty hard to understand. What does this all mean? Well, it's a pretty simple system, and the way it works, and I'm going to show you in a slightly different way in a minute, is that a plant produces exudates. And these are substances which are produced as a result of photosynthesis, and these produce sugars and carbon-filled molecules which drip out of the root system of all plants. These are known as exudates, and these exudates attract bacteria and fungi to the rhizosphere. Let's show you how it operates in real terms. These are a bunch of trees that are sitting around the Pyrenees, and they're hungry. It's a Friday afternoon, and they want to eat, and so they have a little discussion, and one of them wants Japanese food, one wants Mexican food, and one wants French food. Well, the Japanese tree wins, and so they have Japanese food. And the way they get their Japanese food is they produce an exudate, which they put out of the roots. Let me make these roots. The exudate is designed to attract Japanese food. And lo and behold, once it hits the soil, lo and behold, it attracts Japanese bacteria and fungi. These bacteria and fungi are then eaten by their predators, nematodes and protozoa. Nematodes and protozoa poop out the excess that they don't need into the rhizosphere, and it turns out to be nutrients in plant usable form. What a great system. And all the plant has to do is change the exudate to get the kind of food that it wants. If it wants American food, it changes the exudate, puts it out into the soil, and the next thing you know, it attracts American microbes. The plant is in control. That's often a hard thing for us to understand, but they are in control and not you. You come along and change the system which the plant normally operates on. And the plant requires this system because it has to have nutrients in the right form with an electrical charge in order to be able to get into the cells of the root. And so all of this eating and pooping creates these nutrients in plant usable form, meaning it puts a charge on them. So what we've got here is the microbes bringing nutrients to the rhizosphere as a result of eating the bacteria and the fungi by basically protozoa and nematodes. Protozoa are things like amoebas and parameciums. Nematodes are true worms. And again, they poop out the excess, which feeds the plant. This is a root, and this is the exudate system dripping out of the root, along with some slough cells and things like that. And it attracts these bacteria who eat it, and they have a great time. And then along come the protozoa and the nematodes, and they eat these bacteria. And there's also some fungal in here which get eaten. This is the exudate coming out of a root. You can see it here. Usually it's right in this zone right here. Now, some of these bacteria are not eaten, and some of these fungi are not eaten. They operate differently. They're attracted to the rhizosphere, and I'm going to tell you what they do. Let's start with the fungi. Very special kinds of fungi, which you've probably heard of, called mycorrhizal fungi, are attracted in that initial exudate mix. They are not eaten, but instead move into the plant, and there they form a little vesicle, and that vesicle is the area where the plant provides the nutrients, the exudates, and where the fungi brings in nutrients from the soil and trades it for those exudates. Here's a great picture of the fungi entering into the area. And lo and behold, the fungus goes out and gets very important nutrients for the plant, and it does so in the soil, moves it back in, and makes that transfer. There are some very special fungi, these mycorrhizal fungi, that associate with grape plants. One of them is known as Interracetes, and it's available commercially. Here are those vesicles on the inside where the transfer takes place. And here is a depiction of a root with the mycorrhizal fungi. And you can see they're so small that they're able to reach in between pores and areas where the root could never get in. And they bring back these particular nutrients, and in particular, phosphorus and nitrogen. Very, very important, obviously, for plant growth, but also water. Here's how they operate. Two grape seedlings sitting around in the sun, and one of them says, geez, I'd really like some grape today. No, let's make that duck. And so what does it do? It, thinking about the duck, it makes the right exudate. It puts that exudate out into the soil. And the next thing you know, it attracts the fungi that it needs to go out and bring the duck or the bologna or whatever the plant wants to eat back to the seedling. And lo and behold, this is sort of a permanent thing, and it stays there, and they continue to grow. And so bigger, better, as a result of this wonderful relationship, which once established and not disturbed, will continue for the life of the plant. It's a permanent relationship if you let it be. And what's really fun is that sometimes two grape plants next to each other will actually share nutrients amongst themselves. These particular mycorrhizal fungi attract carbon from the air and bring it into the soil. They do so because they have a substance known as glomalin, which here is dyed green, which is extremely important, very, very important to add carbon into your soil. You want to have as many mycorrhizal associations with your grape plants as you possibly can. Again, certain certain mycorrhizal fungi associate with grapes. These are the two key ones that you want to have. They are available commercially. The hyphae absorb and transport water, and that's extremely important. You're having a drought. This is incredibly important. You get much more benefit from the water that's there as a result. And here's a picture of wheat grown with mycorrhizal fungi. When you add the mycorrhizal fungi, unbelievable that the plants thrive in the drought, whereas without the mycorrhizal fungi added, they don't thrive. The root systems become bigger and denser as a result of using mycorrhizal fungi. More roots means more nutrients and more water. They produce very interesting substances, these fungi, which protect the plant. Remember, the mycorrhizal fungi has developed an association, a symbiotic relationship with that plant over thousands and thousands of years. It's important that the fungi keep that plant alive by taking out anything bad that it possibly can using metabolites and whatnot that it can produce in order to protect the plant. You should know that in a teaspoon of simple wheat soil that's growing wheat, has 3 miles of invisible mycorrhizal fungi. Pretty much the same thing happens with grapes. You want these mycorrhizal fungi. They extend the surface area and reach of your roots and increase the nutrition and the water which your plants are going to be able to take in. And again, here are some pictures of roots infected by mycorrhizal fungi, so you can actually see how they increase the surface area of the roots. Now, you've got another member that isn't necessarily eaten, and that's some of the bacteria that are attracted to the root as a result of the exudates. The ones that are not eaten break into the root meristem cells, the brand new cells in the root system, and they literally break in and they find themselves through the cell wall in an area known as the paraplasmic space. It's a little hollow area around the inside of the cell, and there they congregate and they multiply and move around as they're doing so. So they're cycled around in that paraplasmic space, which is the blue here. Here they are inside a cell. These are the microbes, the bacteria that have entered that cell, and they're circling in that paraplasmic space. Another depiction, different kind of plant. What happens is when they enter, the plant goes, "Ooh, wait a minute, a bacteria just came in," and they spray the bacteria with a substance known as a RO, a reactive oxygen substance that strips off the cell wall of the bacteria. The cell wall removed, the bacteria still live, but the plant gets to absorb all of the nutrients that are in those cell walls. Well, these bacteria are multiplying every 20 minutes and moving around, and they don't appreciate being sprayed by that RO, and so they defend themselves by producing ethylene, which happens to be a plant hormone as well as a bacterially produced substance in this instance. The ethylene causes the plant cell to stretch, and at the same time, the plant is giving or letting in a little bit of carbon to keep the bacteria alive. And what's happening is they are circulating around using that carbon and producing ethylene. They also produce nitrate. They generate nitrate, I should say, as a way to weaken that plant spray, that RO, so that the bacteria aren't killed. And so they generate nitrate and they generate nitric oxide. And the nitric oxide gets converted into nitrate, which further weakens that RO, but it's absorbed by the plant. They are actually fixing nitrogen inside the root and providing that nitrogen to the plant. Now, they're doing it to protect themselves, but it ends up feeding the root system. And the circulation continues every 20 minutes. These wall-less bacteria breed, and finally they get to concentrations that are so high that instead of circulating around all of the ethylene concentrates right up against the cell wall. And what happens? A tube is formed by that ethylene. That little portion of the cell wall stretches out. You and I know that tube to be a root hair. And if you haven't put two and two together, you should know now that if you don't have those bacteria, you do not get root hairs. If you remove the bacteria, root hairs do not form. The bacteria move into the tube and continue to multiply and continue to grow. And here they are stained. The metabolite that they create creates this blue stain so you can see their presence, and they continue to multiply, and the populations continue to increase in these tubes or root hairs. And eventually the population gets big enough that they are literally shot out of the tip of the root hair back into the soil. And here's a great picture. They were in here, they came out, and here they are in the soil. And when they get back in the soil, these bacteria regrow their cell wall. They can be blown out of the root hair as it grows several times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As the root hair grows, if there are enough bacteria, they're blown out of the root hair, put into the soil. So you may think that root hairs are designed to absorb nutrients, but in fact, they're designed to put these bacteria back out into the soil. They happen to be extremely thin-walled, brand new parts of the root cell, and so therefore they're thin and they're able to absorb nutrients very easy, which is how we got that idea that that's all they were there for. But once these bacteria get back in there, they regrow their cell walls and then they repeat the trip 2 or 3 days later. So they're continually feeding the plant cell wall bacterial nutrients and fixing nitrogen. Up to 40% of the nitrogen that the plant uses can come from this rhizophagy cycle. And it's a beautiful system discovered in 2010, popularized in 2018. So if you haven't heard of it, you need to Google rhizophagy and learn about it. Up to 40% of the nitrogen your plant gets. All of your root hairs are as a result of these bacteria that move in to the cells. Rhizophagy sort of reminds you of Little Shop of Horrors, plants eating bacteria. So why do we care? Well, we care for a number of reasons. This soil food web enables the plants to operate on a natural basis. They're fixing nitrogen with bacteria. Everything's going happy. They're being fed by mycorrhizae. And if you come along with chemical fertilizers, you end up destroying a lot of the bacteria. You end up preventing a lot of the mycorrhizal fungi from forming. Why? Because the plant says, why am I attracting mycorrhizal fungi with very hard to make, energy intensive exudates when I don't need to? You're giving them to me free in nutrients. I don't need to do all these things. And lo and behold, you end up not having nitrogen fixation, not having the mycorrhizal fungi, having a weakened soil food web. And that means you have to become the bacteria and fungi and the nematodes and protozoa because you've destroyed their populations. It's not a good thing. And then, of course, if you don't have the protection of the bacteria and fungi, you end up getting problems. So, for example, this particular fungi is associated with a tomato root. And lo and behold, when this nematode swims into it, it kicks off these little areas here. They fill up with water, these little tubes, and they kill that nematode. If you don't have the fungi because you're applying chemicals, the nematode gets into the plant. Also, you're creating soil structure by this attraction of bacteria and fungi. The bacteria produce a slime which sticks individual particles of soil together, creating larger aggregates. And then along come the fungi and they weave together a lot of these aggregates, which are not consistent of flat-walled molecules. These are irregular surfaces, and therefore these aggregates allow water to sneak in, air to be held, hiding places for the little guys to get away from the bigger guys. This is where soil structure comes from. And if you're using chemicals, you're not getting soil structure. So really obvious takeaways, well, you probably know what they are. First, plants are in control, not you. Let the plants do what they need to do. That's the organic secret. They're amazing. They know what to eat. They know how to use their sunlight to create things to attract them. Let them do what they need to do. Do not add chemicals. Chemicals have a negative impact on the soil food web. They cause either an increase in one kind of microbe or another that happens to like that particular kind and changes the population mix, or they actually can kill a lot of the microbes because they're a salt and they pull the water out and blow the microbe up. So you got to be very, very careful about using chemicals, and you don't want to use chemicals, fertilizers that have numbers over 10, 10, 10. You want to be careful using pesticides because you don't want to kill members of the soil food web. That's what's causing your plant to grow and protecting your plants. And more important than anything else, you want to make sure that you take care of what's known as the law of return. What falls from a plant is supposed to fall from the plant in order to feed the soil food web. Well, you're a grape grower. You're removing parts of the plant, and they're not going down to feed the soil food web, and you're removing the fruits of the plant. That's not going down, decaying and feeding the soil food web. So you violated the law of return. Now, if you were just growing grape plants, no problem. But you're removing stuff from the grape plants and you're violating that important law. So you want to replace what you've taken out so that you can make up for violating the law of return. And what you do is you provide microbe food, not fertilizer. You want to provide organic material which microbes eat to increase microbe populations, not fertilizers. And microbe food comes in all sorts of organic forms, mostly fish and poop. You've got it, it's available, and it's easy to apply. Another obvious takeaway, well, You want to compost, compost, compost. Compost contains all of the nematodes, all of the protozoa, which are the fertilizer spreaders, and all of the bacteria and fungi you could possibly want, other than mycorrhizal fungi, because they need a root in order to live. So you have to add the mycorrhizal fungi after you make your compost and just as you apply it. Same thing with mulches. Mulch, mulch, mulch. And both compost and mulch should come from materials from your vineyard. That's what makes it a closed system. That's what makes it sustainable. And these materials are what would normally be used in the law of return. You don't sterilize seeds, obviously, because they contain bacteria that help the plant to grow. You don't sterilize soil because obviously the soil food web would be killed off. And of course, you should be buying a copy of Teaming with Microbes so that you fully understand how the soil food web operates. And at the back of the book are 19 rules which you should be following. Best practices: make compost and mulches using grape plant materials, feed the soil, obey the law of return, or pay the consequences. Use living mulches. They're not going to compete with water because your grape roots are much, much deeper. The wood mulch, they in fact will keep some of the water in the system as a result of the cover that they create. So you want to use wood mulches, compost, soybean meal, organics. That's what you want to use as mulches. And you want to test with something known as a microbiometer. The first thing you do is a normal NPK test, and then you use a microbiometer, which will tell you whether you're increasing or decreasing the microbes in your soil with your particular activities. And don't disturb the soil. Don't rototill the soil. You break up the soil food web when you do that. There's a fragile network of fungi which gets destroyed. When you cut a worm in half, you don't get two worms. You put the bacteria in an area where it's not meant to be. Don't worry. You can prevent compaction by using your mulches and letting the soil food web do that. You do not need to rototill your soil. And of course, you need to employ the best practices of all, which is to study the soil food web. One way is by reading the Teaming Quadrilogy. You can also use Google and look up all the aspects of the soil food web. There are a phenomenal number of scientific papers on it. This is the way to be growing grapes, not only because it's safer for the people consuming your product, it's safer for you and your workers as you produce that product. And I believe you get a much better product with higher bricks and a much better taste as a result of letting the natural soil food web operate instead of a fake chemical system. You want to make sure you're improving your soil, as I noted. This is the website for the microbiometer, and it's a $5 or $10 test, which will allow you to know whether you're increasing the microbes as you continue to do your activities. If you're not convinced, I ask people to just think about this. You know, the redwood forests, the Pyrenees, all of the great forests of the world. Who ever fertilizes them? Nobody. They grow the way they grow. They grow to the great heights, the tremendous mass, as a result of teaming with the microbes. And you should too. Simple as that. And one last thing, if you've got an extra row or two in your vineyard, why don't you plant a little bit of food and take it to somebody that needs it? We need to help feed the hungry as well as become sustainable, regenerative growers. The book I've written, all of my books actually are in lots of different languages, so look for them. And again, this is not really the end. And you shouldn't let it be the end. You need to start teaming with microbes. And if you're already teaming with microbes, you need to improve that team. It's very easy to do.